in the world. And just so that we can make sure that we manage the technical sides, okay, I have with us assisting myself. My name is Harsev Bains. I'm a trustee of the Marx Memorial Library, as well as the National Vice President of the Indian Workers Association. It's my pleasure to be the host this evening. I have assisting me in the background Marianne Jump from the Marx Memorial Library, and I'm sure it will be familiar to many of you. And she'll be helping me with the technical side of things. If I may, if you're not already familiar with these sort of Zoom webinars, is to ask you to keep your cameras off and your audio off. Please do place all questions that you have in the chat, and Marianne in the background will be looking at them, and we'll be looking at them, and we shall put those questions to the speakers for them to provide you with further information and answer any further questions you may have. We do have a number of events taking place, even though we have been shut for a while. And while we've been closed at the library, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that it's safer in the future, and obviously some remedial works that we had to do due to a flood that we had last year. So if I may just mention, I'll mention again at the end. There'll be a panel on American radical publishing, 1917 to 1945 on 24th September. This will be via Zoom, and our 8-week online course will begin as well on Marxist economics, labor value, and exploitation, which commences on 5th of October. And you'll find details on our website to all of these, and of course, other programs that we're doing. And on the chat as well, you'll see other things that have been mentioned, which if you're looking at the chat as well, you will be able to pick those details up. We will be reopening our reading room to appointments from 15th September. So that's pretty exciting stuff. That's only a couple of weeks away now. Following a successful risk assessment that's been carried out, and obviously it'll be finalized to make sure that when people do return, they return in a very safe manner. And we're able to provide you, albeit with a limited service, but a very important service to our readers, to our members, who've been very, very faithful and been supporting us. And we look forward to your further support in the year. So if you're not already a member, my appeal as always is please do become a member and join the MML. We need just 10 more members to join to reach our target of 100 by end of August. And we would like to have 1,000 members by the end of the year, but that's my own take on it. And I don't know if my trustees will share that, but I don't think it's an impossible task for us to achieve if we set our minds to it. You will see a lot of that being talked about on the chat line. So please do enjoy the evening. I hope you will find it valuable. I'm certainly looking forward to our presenters. We have 2 out of the 3. One unfortunately had to drop out. Roger had to drop out at the last minute. But we will try, and between the presenters that we have, the 2 key speakers that we have, I'm sure they'll fill the gaps. If not, I'm sure we can, between us, fill that gap on the particular issue. Roger was going to talk about class and racism. I think a number of us will fill that gap anyway. If not, I shall certainly come back to that as well to make sure that you're not shortchanged. Those that have signed up from long distances, please enjoy. So it's my pleasure. As I said, we've got both the keynote speakers. We have Claudia Webbe, trustee, member of parliament, and much more importantly, a social activist on this very, very important question of racism. And she's been a campaigner on against race discrimination, championing the cause of people and communities up and down the country. She's now currently a member of parliament for Leicester East. And as I said, a very, very keen campaigner on this issue and a trustee of Marx Memorial Library. She has done tremendous amount of work. And if you have been following her, you would have picked up on all the interventions she makes against racism. And if you haven't been following her, then I think it's probably about time you did. And follow her on tweet and on Twitter, and obviously take this campaign forward. We also have in the audience John McDonald, who's the Vice President of Marx Memorial Library, the former Shadow Chancellor, and Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. So a warm welcome to him and to everybody else who is joining us this evening. So Claudia will be our first speaker, and she will share her experiences. I'm not going to actually pigeonhole her into say what she will talk about. I'm going to give her pretty much a little bit of a free range to see what she wants to talk about. And we've got Alan Kunna, and I'll introduce him as well later on. And he will share a bit of PowerPoint stuff as well with them, a little bit of magical stuff, a bit technical that Mariam will have to help us with. So Claudia, as I said, the platform is yours. I've left you the canvas wide open rather than say you will only talk about this. So you know the issues, so it's over to you. And very warm welcome to Claudia. I know she's very, very busy, so welcome to you to this webinar.
Thank you so much, Harsev, and it's a real pleasure to join such an inspiring range of comrades and friends this evening. I would really just like to start just by briefly, and if Roger was with us, I would have just really praised his standing for the General Secretary of Unison. I think that's a brilliant move on Roger's part, because Roger's been a tireless champion of the working class, and of course he was instrumental in Unison's endorsement of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, and as General Secretary I believe he will lead the fight for the rights of our most vulnerable workers. So good luck to Roger in that pursuit. And I would just like to really start by briefly celebrating the Marx Memorial Library and Workers' School, which really is a treasured resource of the global working class. And I am honoured as a trustee, and I urge all of you watching to become a member if you've not already done so. Many of you watching, of course, this evening will be familiar with one of Karl Marx's most famous quote, which is that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed. Unfortunately, when we consider our current moment of global racial and class inequality, it appears that Marx has been proven correct. The crisis we face today, from climate change to the rise of authoritarian governments, are animated by an intersect with class struggles. When we look at our world today, a world in which half of global wealth belongs to the richest 1%, a world in which global and regional inequalities are defined by racialized violence and extraction, we see another historical epoch which remains defined in Marx's language of the oppressor and oppressed. For instance, the COVID-19 is of course unprecedented in the scale of its economic and social disruption. Yet it's also shining a light on existing racial, class and global inequalities, which have deepened after a century of brutal, unrestrained neoliberal policies. We know that the Office for National Statistics found that Black people are 1.9 times more likely to die than white people from coronavirus, that people of Bangladeshi and Pakistani descent are 1.8 times more likely to die, and people with Indian descent around 1.5 times more likely to die from COVID-19. You know, these inequalities are grounded in class inequalities. and reflect the severe racial disparities in our economy. The Resolution Foundation think tank estimate that Black, Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi employees experience an annual pay penalty of 3.2 billion. Imagine that. Many have tried, of course, to dismiss the imbalance in coronavirus deaths as being explained by cultural or even genetic differences. Yet discrimination is deeply ingrained in the social, political, and economic structures of our economic system. So we must always reject these cultural and genetic differences that people want to pull through. Because the scourge of institutional racism results in unequal access to quality education, healthy food, livable wages, and affordable housing, which actually are the foundations of health and well-being. So as Marx said, to be radical is to grasp the things by the roots. This must be, therefore, our approach to understanding the grim intersection of race and class in this pandemic. Because whilst billionaires increase their wealth and self-isolate on luxury yachts, workers in Leicester and across the world are forced to put themselves at risk in order to pay the bills. I've been recently reflecting, as I'm sure all of you have been, on how much the achievements of the labour and trade union movement have been cut away during the failed neoliberal project of the last half century. It's hard not to wonder how many of the frontline staff that have died due to exposure from the coronavirus could have been saved if recent governments had actually focused on building up protections for workers rather than transferring the wealth that they create to the super rich. The latest Office for National Statistics data found that the mortality rate of deaths involving coronavirus in the most deprived areas of England was more than double in the least deprived areas. Last year, a special rapporteur for the UN, the UN's Human Rights Council, reported that austerity measures in the United Kingdom are actually reinforcing racial subordination. According to their findings, the findings of the UK's most recent race disparity audit, Black and Asian children are twice as likely to be in persistent poverty and live in substandard accommodation than white British children. That is the context in which the coronavirus virus crisis is operating. This uneven deaths reflect a global economic system which has been built upon racialized extraction and subordination of the working class. So the heightened suffering of African, Asian, and minority ethnic communities is tragically a global trend. In the United States, more than 1/3 of infections nationwide have affected African Americans. And according to data from the Centers for Disease Control, we've seen that, and likewise, we've seen that nearly 3 times as many Black Americans are dying from coronavirus as white people. Sadly, this actually reflects the embedded racialized violence in America, which has been brutally exposed by the Black Lives Matter movement. It is a grim testament to the inescapable nature of institutional racism that viral videos of unarmed African Americans, men, women, and children being killed by white police officers have become nauseatingly commonplace. Yet even within this depraved normality, we've seen the video of George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police, understandably provoking a wave of revulsion, anger, and revolt amongst the communities across the world, and in particular, African, Asian, and minority communities, but it's become a global understanding, a wake-up call that society and globally, internationally, people have woken up to the reality of what has been happening for years now. Just this week, we've seen a fresh horror circulating on the internet showing Jacob Blake being shot 7 times in the back by a police officer as he leaned into his car. His 3 children, we're told, were sat in the back. So in Wisconsin, the scene of the shooting, a far-right Trump-supporting police idealizing the 17-year-old killed 2 black protesters. That is what has happened as a result of what has been going on with the protest. Footage circulating online before the shooting of the police, thanking the gun-touting vigilante for his work and providing him with water. So can you imagine that? The contrast is how white and black Americans are treated by the state. You couldn't hardly get a greater contrast than that. It couldn't be more staggering in terms of how the treatment is differentiated. In response to this blatant racist murder, sports teams are effectively going on strike. We've seen that in America. We must now stand in solidarity with them and with all protesters across the world who withdraw their labor in the name of racial justice. Many people have sought to disregard the uprisings in America as unprovoked rioting, yet this does not recognize the fact that America has been built on the slavery, dispossession, and subjugation of its African American population. It is crucial to understand the Black Lives Matter uprising in the context of the centuries of social deprivation and economic extraction that have been endured by African Americans. As the inspiring Marxist Angela Davis said, if we are, and I just read what, if we are going to rise out of our oppression, our poverty, if we are going to cease being the targets of the racist minded mentality of racist policemen, we will have to obliterate a system in which a few wealthy capitalists are guaranteed the privilege of becoming richer and richer, whereas the people who are forced to work for the rich, and especially Black people, never take any significant step forward. Sadly, these words by Angela Davis can apply equally to us here in the UK. We cannot assume that our institutions are immune from state-sanctioned racialized violence. The brutality of racism in the UK affects us all in all walks of life, from police use of force to unfair immigration detentions to the disproportionate number of Black children who go to bed hungry. The fact that an overtly racist individual, such as Boris Johnson, can ascend to the nation's highest office reveals the corrosive legacy of empire within the British establishment. Sadly, our criminal justice system is not immune from this contamination. Black people are disproportionately suffering from police use of force in the UK, are more likely to be charged, are overrepresented in the prison population as in America. It appears the police can act with impunity as they very rarely face criminal prosecutions. The crucial question facing those of us who seek to end the disproportionate suffering of Black people is, what does it mean to transform Black Lives Matter from a crucial slogan into a reality of daily life? This means reforming, in my view, reforming the UK's racist criminal justice system. This means justice for the victims of racialized state violence, including Grenfell Tower and the Windrush generation. This means when a Black person dies in police custody, as they disproportionately do, the incident is thoroughly investigated and the police involved face justice. It means transforming our British education system to teach the true and enduring history of colonialism, imperialism, and the transatlantic slave trade. It means an end to racist policies like no recourse to public funds and the hostile environment. Ultimately, it means an end to neoliberal capitalism, which actually enshrines racial inequality at home and abroad. The words of Martin Luther King Jr. in his famous 1963 I Have a Dream speech remains as relevant today as it did then. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. We cannot therefore allow this moment in history to pass us by. This is a massive opportunity. This is a massive time for change. This is a real time for change. Rosa Luxemburg's prediction that we face either socialism or barbarism remains as true today as it did 100 years ago. The crisis we face require radical solutions. We stand on a precipice in which the crisis of climate breakdown, rampant racial inequality, and the shockingly uneven distribution of wealth seem irreversible. Yet as Marxists, we know there is an alternative, that it is possible to build a society around the needs of all its citizens and the principles of solidarity. It is up, therefore, I believe, to us to fight for that better world in which all of us, regardless of our color, and regardless of our position, and regardless of our situation, that all of us fight for that dignity, that solidarity, and that transformational change. We should expect no less as socialists. Our time, if ever we needed to act, our time to act is now. As socialists, we must move forward to transform society so that it provides a better outcome for all of us, each and every one of us, so that no one is left behind. So solidarity, my friends, solidarity.
That was absolutely excellent and absolutely spot on in what this debate is actually all about, and such inspirational words from the trustee of Marx Memorial Library and obviously a member of parliament. And as I said in the introduction, I think the presentation speaks for itself, speaks volumes for the work and the experience that Claudia has put forward in 15 odd minutes, actually taken us through history, through experiences of racism, of imperialism, of colonialism, and racism here and in US. And I'm reminded, and as you opened up with Karl Marx, he also said, we used words along, no nation can be free if it oppresses other nations. And in their classic works, when they were looking at the initial racism that Britain and people in Britain probably were facing was when the Irish people were coming here. And there was a call to the Irish workers and to the English workers to actually recognize the racism that actually they need to fight this, because fighting for the rights of the Irish workers at the time was a fighting for their own rights. And I think if we need to be free to rid of this racism, we certainly need to follow every single one of those very, very important key steps that Claudia has mentioned, and certainly look forward to the questions and people's response as to how we're going to take this forward and make this Black Lives Movement from a slogan to something real and tangible that we can actually do something about. So I think, and changing some of the systems. So looking forward to some of those. I think absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Claudia. I mean it most sincerely. I think it really is really extremely well put through, and I think opened our eyes to many, many aspects of what we need to be doing and what people have done in the past. And the people do need to speak up. And the words of Martin Luther King, there's nothing more deafening than the silence of our friends. And we really cannot wait any longer. Alan, you've got a key thing to, you've got a fair way to go on this. I'm going to introduce Alan. Boy, the bar's been set high. Okay. Alan Kunna, history teacher and program manager at Newham Sixth Form College, Plaistow, another Londoner like myself. He and Karina Ansell, teachers and honors program manager at Sixth Form, have worked closely with the Marx Memorial Library over the past few years on mobilizing our archives on anti-fascism, anti-racism, movements for colonial freedom and internationalism as part of their Sixth Form learning program. Most recently, Sixth Formers at New Vic carried out a research project at MML on Charlie Hutchison, a Black Briton who fought in the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War. Alan will talk, among other things, about his work and the importance of education, which Claudia has also touched upon, and specifically history teaching and spreading knowledge and understanding on race, class, imperialism in today's world. And Alan and Karina are already in conversation with Marion and the Marx Memorial Library on Black history and anti-imperialism programs. And I won't steal his thunder either, because I'll let him talk about these exciting programs, what he's been doing, and how perhaps we can link on to what Claudia has just said and build on all those things, all those key areas that we now need to work on together. So over to you, Alan, and then we'll open it up to others. And maybe if there's a couple of things we need to say about class, we can fill that in as well. So Alan, over to you. And I think you're going to be using some screen share as well.
Yeah.
So everybody online, I don't know if Facebook, I don't think they can see screen share. So apologies for that. So Alan, you may need to just talk a little bit more, because I don't think they can, unless I'm going to be informed otherwise, I don't think they actually see that on Facebook. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, can everyone can you hear that? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll just speak. A brilliant presentation by Claudia. Well, more of a speech, really. I'm not going to be able to follow that with levels of passion, but would like to discuss the work that myself and my colleague Karina have been doing. If I say just a little bit about myself, I was born in London in the late 1950s, and my father was from Sudan, and my mother's a white British woman. And, when I look back at where we lived and, the kind of surroundings that I was born into and grew up, my mum always said to me that the doctors from London Hospital in Whitechapel came to our flat to see this new baby, and because she were a really nice looking baby. But my older sister said to me a few years ago, she said, that wasn't really the truth, Alan. They just wanted to see how we were living, which was in 2 rooms, one leading off the other, with a shared toilet on the landing. And that's how it was for a lot of people of colour. I didn't suffer. I don't put any kind of idea that I suffered more than anyone else. It's just, this is how people lived, and this is how people from the working classes lived as well. So what Claudia is saying is that you know, what she said there was that has, you know, is still with us. And one of the key things is that colonial legacy. And it always makes me laugh when I hear British politicians say, or British people say, well, we don't teach enough colonial history. And the simple thing is, because it's so painful, if you actually revealed the reality of colonial history, people would be shocked, you know, at the, let's say, you know, the way that the Mau Mau revolt was put down. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting that we have a key advisor to Boris Johnson, who is he's married to Mary Wakefield, whose grandfather was you know, Sir Evelyn Baring, who was the governor of Kenya, who called the emergency and oversaw a lot of the brutality that went on. You know, that's not talked about too openly. Let's move away from that. When the British government in I think 2014, you know, caved in and gave money to the Mau Mau veterans who had been tortured in the camps. You know, William Hague came to the House of Commons and said, "This is what we're going to do." No one's ever really talked about the British government perjuring themselves by saying that the records that existed didn't exist. And it was only a group of historians who said, well, actually, you've got a secret facility up there in Hertfordshire, and that stuff's in there. And this was the embarrassment to the British government. Okay. And there are many of these stories, and we go back, you know, through the centuries, and we come to the issue of slavery and where much of the wealth that has built much of Great Britain actually comes from. I wasn't about to say all that. I'm just going to talk about, but Claudia's speech kind of, you know, that's there. What I'm trying to do as a history teacher is just try to get Black history on the agenda, because it is completely vacant. So I've said in my first slide is, does Black history exist? Well, in many ways, well, no, not in the British education system, because if you look at the national curriculum, the people who drew it up and just ignored it, there's a few little bits in there. And recently we've had some things at GCSE, migration and empire, but you still got that idea of empire and, you know, colonial subjugation and slavery, but, you know, and it ended and people were freed, and, you know, that was a good move by the British. We don't actually talk about why it was there in the first place. Okay. The A-level examination board's almost like non-existent. Okay. One thing that is there that gives, if not some hope, but shows that Black people, yeah, some hope, is the OCN African Kingdoms module, which is an important step. But, you know, it's only taught by about 3 or 4 institutions in the country. That's an A-level option. So only delivered at a handful of centres. And, you know, at my college, I'm hoping that we actually change that and begin to deliver that. This is something that I've been passionate about for years. You know, I attended Coventry Polytechnic and then School of Oriental and African Studies and the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. So these studying African politics, history of colonialism has been my kind of passion for, you know, for decades, really. And it's, you know, Claudia was right. This is the moment. This is the moment we can push things onto the agenda, because once it's there, it can be difficult to take it off, but we have to be vigilant and make sure it remains there. Okay. Could you do the next slide, Marion? Okay, so we're a sixth form college in Newham. Okay. You know, people who, if you know Newham, it's a deprived borough in East London, and it's a fully comprehensive college. We have many new rivals that have opened up their own sixth form colleges, their own sixth forms that are highly selective, and we're not. There are some minimum standards, of course, but nothing like what we have, you know, which are like just really grammar schools under another badge. Okay. And, you know, they do very well, but they're highly selective. I'm interested in teaching and education for all. Okay, so we've got some very good senior managers, and one in particular, who is my manager, who really is encouraging us to face outward and develop partnerships with academic institutions and institutions like the Marx Memorial Library as a way of really like developing our students' ideas and exposure to history. So we've worked with universities such as, you know, King's College, Marx Memorial Library, the Toynbee Hall, and, you know, a range of other colleges. And you know, those partnerships have been really fruitful for our students, and also we've, you know, been able to engage in some original research, which is great for those students, but it's also a signpost for how we could approach the, in a sense, the study and the relaying, the teaching of Black history. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so the key thing is what I said before about the syllabus is you've got to go beyond it. You know, the syllabus is for A level and GCSE and the national curriculum are way too restrictive. You will never be able, you know, the people who are writing them are never really going to, or at some point in the future, we may get there, but, you know, what they will put in there and the way that they will approach the subject. Okay, you know, this idea about decolonizing the curriculum, you know, what part do the Black and Asian characters, societies, individuals have agency? Well, not really. When you look, a lot of the stuff that's put on syllabuses and served up as the history of like the empire, the people in them in their own ways don't really exist. So I think really what we've got to do is engage in actively devising the curriculum and making it more inclusive, and thereby studying and exploring themes such as race, gender and class, and very often personal history, because as a Black person, my father was in the Merchant Navy, and I learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot from my mum. My mum actually lived on Cable Street during the time of the Battle of Cable Street. There's a picture we kind of look at and laugh about in my family, which is my uncle and aunt looking out of a window, which was taken by, you know, onto the scene now. Okay, you know, when they were young teenagers. And, you know, if when I say to people, well, that's my aunt and uncle, they kind of can't compute it because my aunt and uncle are white, you know. But, you know, the idea of being of mixed heritage, you know, that you may have a stake in British society is just not really kind of part of the people's thinking. Many people, they're just confused by what you say. Okay, but my dad was in the Merchant Navy, and from him I learnt that there was a colour bar, you know, within the Merchant Navy, you know, below decks and above decks, this kind of thing that, you know, the people in the crew room, you know, working the engines were often, you know, Black labour from Asia, from East Africa, from, you know, he was from North Africa, West Africa, wherever. Okay, and it's hot and dangerous work and loud and noisy. Okay, and that's the work that you were set to do. Okay, and from that, you know, you learn a lot about how you know, people lived and people were treated in the kind of, in a sense, is a microcosm of the British Empire, really. You know, white rulers and the you know, blacks are doing the serving. Okay. So the key thing is, I think, about developing young historians and historical perspectives. Could you go to the next slide? I'll just run through things quickly because I know people want to discuss with Claudia and, you know, the panel and, you know, things. Okay. But Black history, really, things aren't negative if we take control. You know, we've got rich opportunities for learners to take part and make real discoveries that allow new perspectives, because Black history is hidden. Okay. Once you bring it out into the open, people can include their own personal histories. We've seen with the Windrush scandal, people's own histories. How did you come to Britain? How comes you were, you know, taken by the state and incarcerated and perhaps deported from the country that you considered to be your own. Yeah. Okay, this is very important. Okay. So its sources need to be traced and recognised. Black history is not going to be like ready-made. You're not going to go to the library, you know, and look for a book about, let's say, the Duke of Wellington and find 10 to choose from. Go on to Amazon. I'm going to find a book about the, I don't know, the Duke of Wellington, Winston Churchill. You know, you could fill the libraries with that stuff. You are going to have to go out and look for it, and you're going to have to go out and search for it. And some of the sources are going to be found in the Marx Memorial Library. Rich archive of anti-colonial literature I've actually seen myself, you know, pamphlets that people produced, so on, in critiques of empire. It is there, but you have to go out, collect it, search for it, collect it, and write those histories. So that's the opportunity. Okay, so the task of historians young and old is to draw these together. And, you know, it's actually to exhume people from the past. I mean, Walter Tull is a really interesting character in this way. He was a black footballer who played for Tottenham, a black man who played for Tottenham Hotspur before the First World War, and also Northampton Town. Okay, Walter Tull was largely unknown before 2000. Okay, I have a book called The Black Footballers of Britain, and it was written in like about 1980, and Walter Tull gets a 2-line mention. Go forward about 35 years later, Walter Tull is being commemorated on stamps and coins, and books are being written about him, you know, for school kids, for you know, for adult readers. And the interesting thing about Walter Tull is this kind of idea of seizing the moment. I think we get an idea, funnily enough, it's about celebrating the First World War, and also like the British Army, you know, because you're at war in all sorts of places, and suddenly people want to know about military history, and you bring in Walter Tull because he was a soldier in the First World War. You know, he was a lieutenant who commanded, as they like to say, troops, which means he was, you know, against King's regulations, allowed to command white troops. You know, it's an amazing story, but really one of the most amazing bits about Walter Tull is the fact that he was a largely unknown figure, but at the right time, that exposure brings out the idea that Walter's an everyman. He's a footballer, he's very talented, he's a soldier, and he looks very splendid in his officer's uniform. And there you go. You can bring that character out, and now he's part of British history. But so many black people don't have a profile. Yeah, and you know, this is a real a source of much pain as I would go on. Anyway, the importance of collaboration, partnerships, and working. You know, we've tried to bring at New Vic together with things like King's College, Marx Memorial Library. And one of the greatest things we did, almost like entirely by accident, was a project about a man called Charlie Hutchison, who was born in, I think in 1918, in March. And Marion, I came along one day with a group of students. We were listening to a talk about the Spanish Civil War and looking at that. And then suddenly Marion said, well, there's this, we know about this Black Briton called Charlie Hutchison. We have a few fragments of knowledge about him. And what happened there was that this turned into a massive project for myself, my colleague, and my students. Okay, our students rather. So we ended up researching Charlie's life, and using the Marx Memorial's rich archive, and you know, just a very friendly and supportive atmosphere. And one of the things that we were able to do by some flukes in some ways was to trace Charlie's children, and they wanted to talk about his life, because his life beyond the few fragments was really interesting. His father was from the Gold Coast, his mother was English, probably his father was very wealthy at one time, or reasonably wealthy. Okay, but Charlie then experienced massive poverty, so much so he ended up with his sister in a national children's home. But when he came out of that, he was very much a young black working class man living in just over the, you know, in South London, or was, you know, around Wandsworth. Okay, he was a great resistor to fascism. He joined the hunger marches. He was at Cable Street. But he as a young man, 17 years old, he went and joined the International Brigade. He also the First World War. He also was a soldier in World War Two. He was at Dunkirk and he was at the relief of Bergen-Belsen. Okay, as he said, the most terrible day of my life. Okay. And his life is the intersection of race and class, because he was always, as his family attest, a working class man who was a lifelong communist. Okay, him and his wife. All right. So we organised and delivered. We organised our research, and we delivered a kind of an event to Charlie's family, his children, and his the children of his siblings and their grandchildren. I think there was about 20 to 30 people there. Just amazing stuff. Okay, in October 2019. Next slide, Marion. Okay, and these are some of our students' responses. Some people created pieces, but I'm going to show the art pieces because it's like what you can do. This is like a very talented young student who, funnily enough, wasn't an art student, but is now, but you know, has a real artistic talent. Could you go to the next slide? When this slide was put up, there were actually both, but this one in particular, there were gasps around the room because of the family of Charlie and Margaret, which is his sister here. You know, her sibling, her children. Margaret was someone who couldn't really deal with her black background, okay, and really would say to people that she was from a Spanish background. And when her son got up to speak, he just began to cry because he remembered his mother, but also you could tell the hurt and pain. And he told a story about, you know, an old lady on the bus saying, "Where are these boys from, mum?" to his white grandmother. They look a bit different. And you could tell that, you know, this was a very difficult experience from him to remember, but so important that, you know, you acknowledge your African past. Can you go on? Next slide. Okay, so the student said, "I've never imagined my art would have such a powerful impact on someone. It was an unforgettable experience." You know, and that was from Anastasia, one of our year 13 students. She's gone to university now, lovely girl, you know, brilliant. You know, what she got out of that and those brilliant drawings that brilliant piece of artwork that she created. All the family wanted copies of that. Okay, can you go to the next slide, Mariam? Okay, so one of our students, Noah, I was honoured to be part of this project. Okay, this story shows that there were people of other races who played a role, but they are absent when we study history in the national curriculum and pre-university. Noah's very interesting because his grandfather, Anthony Enahoro, was a leader of was the first Nigerian independence leader who called, or first young Nigerian leader who called for independence for Nigeria in the 1950s. And he and his father is very proud of that fact. Okay. A very, you know, famous man in Nigeria, but, you know, Noah, his grandson, is really just coming to, you know, really getting in touch with that kind of his heritage and the links really to the the wider diaspora. Can you go on? Next slide. Okay, so the family experience, and this is the one that I think really puts this into perspective. So the students, for their excellent work, including their art and poems, the family members present were moved to tears, and the age of the family moved from 15 to 75. They all greatly enjoyed the celebration, and my father would be, you know, as a modest man, if he were alive today, would be humbled and honoured to be honoured in this way, you know. Can you go to the next slide, Marion? But what Susan, Charlie's daughter, really wrote that just really, I think, sums up a lot of things, is as a mixed race teenager growing up in Dorset, it was sometimes difficult. I was always felt the odd one out at my school. It was so liberating to feel as an adult that I can talk about my amazing heritage with pride. Because when we'd got in contact with Susan, she was developing this amazing archive about her family and really discovering that she has more about her black heritage. She didn't really know very much from her father because her father, you know, his own father had left his life when he was about, I think, 4 or 5. Okay, so there's this vague notion that the family had this African heritage, but it's far more complex because Charles Francis Hutchinson, her grandfather, also had white heritage. His ancestor had been one of the first Europeans to go to make treaty with the King of Ashanti in the Bowdish expedition, I think that went to the Ashanti Kingdom in the 1820s or 30s. Okay, so a really interesting rich family, and when you go in, it's like a mine. You don't know where it's going to take you because there are so many aspects. You know, you know, a, a, a family of British mixed and African heritage that have so much to offer, but have been cut off from that and are discovering it, and you know, getting a huge source of pride. And this shows you so much about Black history being hidden actually from people of African heritage themselves. So in future projects, we're launching an African Studies Centre in October 2020. We've got things going on each term, talks that are going to be going on at 5, you know, different times, but mainly at 5 in the evening, so we can you know, get a wider audience as possible. And we're looking at the African medieval kingdoms and then going on to talks about the experience of the African diaspora. And one of the things that it's going to do, we're going to have some talks where Charlie's family, his son and his daughter are going to be speaking and you know, talking about their father and his life. So those future collaborative projects with the Marx Memorial Library, as I've said before, got a hugely rich archive of anti-colonial and anti-apartheid material that I've kind of looked at quite a lot myself, but there's so much there. You know, it's kind of it's there in the boxes, beautifully archived, but you know, more people need to be aware of it and more people need to use it. And in that way, you will come across these struggles that took place very much from, you know, workers' perspectives. Okay. And then finally, to continue the work with them, what we want to do is continue our work with the Marx Memorial Library on developing teaching materials around the life of Charlie Hutchinson. Karina and I are working on 2 articles about Charlie's life and experiences and his wider background that we're hoping to finish within the next month. It's been a bit slow with COVID because we've actually been working on some other stuff, but what we're trying to do in summation is trying to just put Black history on the agenda. And when it's on the agenda, I believe that it can't be taken off. I've been waiting for this moment for most of my life, really. That, you know, that we see things that are, we know it's there, but it's never been considered to be important. And what we can do is use this moment to put it there, that once it's there, it cannot be removed, and it needs to then be studied and shown to a wider audience. One of the key things that we need to do is train the young historians of the future. So thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions later on.
Alan, thank you ever so much for that really informative work, that practical work that you and the team has been doing at MML, and obviously some of the work that we now need to do to put into practice our struggle, because we're obviously very familiar with our sort of style of struggle, which is on the streets or campaigning and lobbying parliamentarians and other people in different institutions. But of course, the work in education is fundamental to bring about a change in the mindset of a society. And one of the things that we don't want to lose, and would be interesting to hear from Claudia and others as well later on, is of course the fantastic work that was done by the National Executive Committee of the prior to the last election in putting their manifesto together. where they recognized this importance aspect of teaching of British colonial history and making it part of the national curriculum. It's important that we don't lose that, that it's not lost under the new leadership, it's not lost under the future national executives and the manifesto, because that was a fantastic achievement to recognize that. And I know the National Education Union has been pushing for it as well. There's a number of great questions coming up that we will be putting to the panel. But just again to add the apologies from Roger Mackenzie, that is due to work commitments that he had to give a very short message this morning, that it was his inability to attend, and his sincere apologies to you as panelists, and much more importantly to everybody else who signed up. That is not because he didn't see this as important, but because of work commitments, that suddenly something came up that he simply could not get out of. But I think everybody who signed in will appreciate that Claudia and Alan have certainly filled a lot of the blanks and a lot of the stuff that perhaps Roger would have touched upon. Of course, Roger, in his own way, would have talked about his own life experiences and the class struggle, the divisive class struggle that's going on, and that leads to racism, to use race to divide communities, whether it's in this country or in the US. And since Claudia mentioned Angela Davis, I was looking at her up and then thinking, well, you know, what does the lady say? She's 76 years young at the moment, and she's fascinated and taken in by the great struggle. She's inspired by the great struggle that people are doing in translating Black Lives Matter. And she said, people said, well, don't all lives matter? She said, well, you're finally getting it. But if you're saying that, you're finally getting it, because people haven't been recognizing Black lives as equal. And that's why you're finally getting it, if you're recognizing that, because certainly it didn't matter. Otherwise, people wouldn't have to do what's happening today. And I think it's great. Thank you. Thank you ever so much. As I said, it is very, very important that we link up right across, and we'll be able to see how we're going to do that. It's not just the Marx Memorial Library, of course, it's the National Education Union, it's the parliamentarians, it's the councillors up and down the country who are all going, and parents and teachers and governors, who all need to start putting on pressure to say, we need to change the national curriculum to make sure we start talking about these issues. One of the other things that I find, that we talk about slavery, we talk about Black lives, we talk about people who've been moved across, we talk about racism. One of the things that gets lost is also indentured laborers. That British colonials, under British colonialism, people were moved from certainly places like India to everywhere around the world, to Somalia, to Uganda, to South Africa, to Mauritius, to Bahamas, to America, and to the West Indies. Chedi Jagan, I'm thinking from many people would know, the father of the nation, or considered the father of the nation in Guyana. He was a son of people working on the farm who were taken, sharecroppers who were taken across from India. And he's become the father of the nation in Guyana, and that's how they ended up there. And they were sold as bonded laborers, treated as abhorrently as slaves, and sold from one master to another to do their willing, whilst all the time they were told they're coming over here to Britain. So there's a lot we need to talk about, a lot we need to learn. You talked about Walter, fantastic, and about Charlie. I think they are inspirational characters we need to know about. You know, how come people are only beginning to realize of the number of people that were killed in the First World War? We haven't even gone to the Second World War yet, that were from the countries that were colonized by Britain. They talked about VJ Day and people from the British and the Commonwealth or the armies killed over there. Majority of them were from the East that were there and died, but there's very little mention on VJ Day about those. So there's a hell of a lot I think we need to uncover. The more we learn, the more we talk about, the more we have opportunities like this to talk on these issues. the more we will ask to question. As Claudia has said, what time to act is now. And that really is what Angela Davis is also saying, that we can't continue to wait any longer. The time is to act. The time is to act. And let us now move on to the question. It really is fascinating. Thank you so much from what you have put out so far. So I'm going to ask Marian, are you going to work through the questions, or shall I just read them off? I don't know if you're going to send me a message.
I've sent you a concise list of questions that have come up. So
Brilliant,
I got them
brilliant, brilliant. Okay, right, question for Alan first. Can you tell us about the parents and families of students reacting to your tracing and curriculum?
The students have been really positive. And one of the things I've tried to do with the students is, because we've got a very mixed group of students, like some of the, we've had kids from Moldova, we've got people from Somalia, we have people from, those two students I mentioned, Noah, who's got Nigerian and Polish heritage. We have Anastasia, who's got Serbian heritage, the girl who created the art. And students of just such a variety, Asian students, black students, I can see the faces and a variety of backgrounds, Nigeria, wherever. And one of the things that I've always tried to do is get them to talk about their heritage, because very often they just kind of push it to the background, and they just say, well, like, why don't you talk about maybe your parents or your grandparents? And after a while, you find that people open up and they think, I never really thought about this. And they go home and they'll talk to people and they just say, oh yeah, like I've found out more. And what they do is then uncover really interesting stories about their own backgrounds. But it's so good to, take students. I've had students from Eastern Europe, and they've actually, to see them get into studying Black history is fantastic, because that's really what we need to do, is like spread that message that this is history. Many years ago, I taught a Hungarian student, and I was doing something on what you call the Arab conquest, or the Muslim kingdoms in the early days after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And the girl said, well, there is no history in this part of the world, because she's very much brought up in the Hungarian style of classical history. After a couple of weeks of doing things, she goes, actually, I was wrong. There is history, but that's a microcosm of what you're up to. As for the parents, they've come along to the talks. They're so proud to see what their kids have done, and they're really proud. They just go, well, that was really interesting. I've learned something. I've learned something about my child, and I've learned something about history that I wasn't informed about before.
Okay,
so
you.
Very positive.
Okay, just before I move on to the next question, I'm going to take a little bit of chair's prerogative here, and I've also had a little nudge as well. I mentioned several times already our Vice President of Marx Memorial Library, John McDonnell, former Shadow Chancellor, and my neighbor from my neighborhood around here. He's actually online. If John, if you are able and willing, we would love to hear from you and your reaction to the debate, and certainly some words from you I think would be appreciated by everyone, because Roger is not with us, but that's not because you know it's a substitute, but it's because you're here, and I can't, I don't really want to miss the opportunity of not being invite you. So I'd really love to invite you to come online and say a few words and share some thoughts with us. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. I'll give you a couple of minutes if you like, and I'll ask Claudia a question while you compose yourself and come online with us. I see John is just coming on the video, so
yes.
Thank you for accepting that sudden invitation.
So I've been cooking while I've been listening, so I've just finished.
I'll come over and eat with you later on.
Look, I thought Claudia's introduction set the scene incredibly well. And again, the way in which we can use education is absolutely key now. One of the points I was going to make, and I was going to put it in the chat later, is we don't, I don't think, and the Marx Memorial Library is about the only institution I know that does this, we don't really have a clear way of demonstrating the class solidarity that's been displayed in our history over centuries when it comes to issues around race as well. A lot of the sort of narrative around particularly the white working class is almost a depiction of the white working class as almost automatically racist. But there's so many historical examples which completely deny that almost accepted wisdom of the way history is taught in our country. And if you look, I was looking at that, someone raised it in a discussion with MML before, just at one point in history, for example, when the American Civil War was taking place, and there was a blockade on the cotton traders, shipping cotton out from the South in America. What happened in Manchester is actually the working class in Manchester also refused to touch any cotton coming out and breaking through the blockade as an act of solidarity with those campaigning and fighting against slavery. And again, you don't see that. In our own recently, just in our, some of us are old enough to be involved in this, you know, whereas, you know, there was this sort of depiction in the 70s into 80s of working class people in this country being inherently racist. Actually, you know, I was on the picket lines at Grunwick. It was the miners who sent the miners into, I can remember a march of 4,000 people marching to Grunwick, most of them mobilized by National Union Mine Workers, the majority of whom were white working class people. So what we've got to do is break through this mythology of racism within the white working class in this country when there are so many examples of solidarity. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make, Black Lives Matter has changed. It's changed the world already. It's changed the dialogue in every area of discussion that's taking place now. And I'll just give one example. In my role as Shadow Chancellor, we did a lot of work on the role of the city. We did a lot of work on how we would develop a fair taxation policy, whereby would be financial transaction taxes, whereby we'd ensure that any company listed on the UK stock market had to abide by basic trade union rights, accept trade unions, environmental standards, etc., and equality measures too. In one of the discussions, and this never came up before, and it shows you how ignorant we were to a certain extent in our discussions. In one of the recent discussions, I set up a working group to talk about where do we go from here about and how we can tackle finance capital. And a couple of people just said, hang on, we can't even talk about that unless we actually talk about the origins of finance in this country and where that finance was based. And let's talk about slavery first of all. Before we even enter into the dialogue about reform, let's talk about the historical origins of finance capital in this country, where it gained its assets as a result of colonial oppression, and in particular slavery. And I just thought, God, why haven't we included in our discussions that up until now? Others said, well, we did, but no one was listening. So I think Black Lives Matter is exactly as Claudia has said, really, it's changed the world. I think our whole discussion about all different aspects of where we go from here has been changed by this one massive movement that, as Claudia said, has now become global. It's just fantastic. And I just to make this final point as well, I was watching the news earlier and looking at the American sports people who were refusing, they've gone on strike as a result of their reaction to the latest assault on a black person, a black man. And I just think that sort of act of solidarity has just got to be so applauded now. And you can feel that a movement is was started, it's developed, it's escalated, but I think it's educating us all and it's demonstrating to all of us what real solidarity means. I think we have a depth of honor to those people those sports people in America tonight who stood up and said, we're not playing these games, we're not entering into sports and entertainments whilst black people are being killed on our streets. And at the same time, demonstrators of all races who are demonstrating for justice are being attacked as well. I think it's demonstrating to all of us what solidarity and what means and what power we have in our hands. They're the only points I'd make, but I thought tonight was terrific. I was particularly interested in how can individualize that history as well to make it so relevant to people, and so particularly to young people who can then look at those individual stories and how from those individual stories they can understand issues of race and class and how they intermingle. Anyway, thanks.
No, brilliant. Excellent.
Gave me the opportunity to be cooking as well.
Excellent. Now, may I ask you to just stay on the panel in case you want to answer the questions that are going to be put forward. There's about half a dozen or so questions, so won't be keeping you that long. But if you can stay online, that'd be really greatly appreciated. And if you can come in on any of the questions, please do come in on those. There's a question: what changes do we fight for in the way history is taught to ensure that race and class are properly addressed without simply being an ad or another voice? In other words, how do we make it meaningful? What deeper changes should we be struggling to develop? So I don't know if he wants to come in. Claudia, do you want to come in, or Alan?
I can say something there, and then I'll keep it very brief. I think John McDonnell kind of hinted that, not hinted, but talked to, is that realistic assessment? Where did the money come from? So when you were talking about Guyana, that indentured labour, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that experience. And I think, if I can say something, when I was a child, when I was at school, in the late 1960s and then in the 70s at secondary school, industrial history was on the syllabus. If you look now, you won't find industrial history, because it was very painful, because you would hear these stories about how people were treated and exploited. Okay. And that's just been removed. That was, in a sense, that was the O level I did. And I think what's really interesting is the way this stuff has been removed. We need to put back on the agenda. John's right. Solidarity with people. You will all, this is what C.L.R. James says in the Black Jacobeans. That rendezvous of victory. There will be blacks, but there will be whites. People of all races will be fighting for justice, and this is really important. So when you're looking at this, I would like industrial history put on the agenda, put back on the curriculum, because it's such, it's so relevant to the time, how people are being, exploited in the workplace. People working on minimum wage contracts, the slavery that we have literally in places like Leicester, that needs to be put there. 0 hours contracts, that was the word I was looking for. So put all of that there, but honest assessments, and decolonize it and make it, the warts and all history, take it away from this. One last point: military museums have vast numbers of things that are captured from Africa. Okay, apparently, I went to a seminar at the Africa Centre, and one of the speakers said, and this wasn't, out there are more artifacts from Africa that are held in European museums than there are still in Africa. And go back to the 60s, you have Lord Dacre, Hugh Trevor Roper saying there is no history in Africa except for the white man. Well, my friend, it was all here. That's why there is no history in Africa. Of course, it was a stupid point to make, but that's what you're battling against. That's why I became interested in colonial and African history. Someone asked me once, why are you interested in this? I said, because I needed to find out and learn why, explain why people were talking to me in the way that they were. Okay, so sorry for taking too much time.
No worries. We've got to try and keep the answers a little bit shorter. Claudia,
yeah, I will.
No worries. Claudia, want to come in on this? You need to unmute.
Need to unmute me. Who's unmuted? Okay.
Marian's done it.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, really, what we're dealing with is, I guess, racism, which is predicated on the issue of the regulation and control of Black lives, and understanding that within the context of it being justified in order to secure wealth, and that is where its roots stem from. The difficulty that there is that our history does indeed need to be taught in a way that understands the class and race inequalities. But the delivery tool that we have is the British education system. We're talking about an education system that already disadvantages Black children, African, Caribbean children in particular. You only have to look at Oxford and Cambridge to see that 21% of current MPs attend those Russell Group universities, as against what happens when it comes to the discrimination faced by African, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Black Caribbean boys' attainment levels in the British education system is appalling. It's in terms of school discipline, Black children fare no worse, and in terms fare no better. And also we've got a situation where discrimination obviously is rife in terms of access to education in the first place. You know, one of the reasons why it was important to fight very hard for the A-level grades to be done on teacher predictions, and that's notwithstanding the fact that we already have a problem with teacher predictions when it comes to what that means in terms of racism, and what that means in terms of those predictions relating to Black children. But the reason why it was important to fight was because that Black children would have fared far worse, because the teacher predictions were already going to be bad in themselves, and we still have to fight those teacher predictions anyway. But what I'm really indicating is that we have a British education system, the tool to transmit a truthful history about Africa, about Asia and the Caribbean. We have a tool that of itself needs a total, in my view, overhaul in order to develop clear systems of racial and class justice. Because if we've had a British education system, and all of us that have had a British education system would have known that all of these years since, we would have had to do a lot of unlearning. And that unlearning is done equally by choice. So we already have too many people in society that was not taught the truthful education. And so, yes, we've got to have history taught in a way that embraces class and race inequalities and gives a truthful understanding of the solidarity, as John has indicated, about how as Black and whites we stood together in solidarity. That truthful understanding needs to be taught, because we know that the whole basis of the education system has been predicated also on a divide and rule concept. That is what sustained racism for so long, because of the divide and rule situation. So this is how obviously racism has played out, and in a sense has created those inequalities, so that even at school, if you went to the school that I went to in Leicester, sadly, children were taught that white children were taught that in particular that they were more superior to me as an African Caribbean child. That requires a lot of unlearning. And so, yes, we do need to change the curriculum, because nothing much has changed. And when we push hard in terms of this government to try to bring about change. Their line has been all the time, you know, that schools have all the materials at hand. The reality is, it is the system itself that needs an overhaul, and that is what needs to change. I think that is part of the key in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, that of course we need to have the truthful history taught, because we've got generations to go yet, and it's important that people understand the truthful history about Africa. And it didn't just end in terms of with the transatlantic slave trade, when slavery ended, the British Empire and the acts of empire and the brutality in which the empire continued. I raised the other day the issue of the Sutik massacre in Kenya, where a whole set of people were basically massacred and land taken. What was the purpose? Land. And what was the purpose? Tea. And who's producing tea in Kenya today? It certainly isn't the indigenous people of Kenya today. So there's so much injustice that has emanated from history, and there's so much injustice that means that for a lot of people, actually, a lot of Black children, African and Caribbean origins, actually don't see how much pride they should have in their origins and where they come from, and what makes up the places that their parents and grandparents and so on came from, the pride that they should have as of right. They don't have that pride because they don't know that history. And when I wrote about the Sutik massacre, I was surprised actually about the numbers of Kenyans from Sutak who actually contacted me and said, I am Kenyan and I didn't know this history. Imagine that.
Absolutely. John, if I may put a question to you, especially given all your years of experience, again, similar to Claudia, been fighting this on this particular issue. What does the labor movement, do you think, needs to do to convince Black and white workers that they're all part of the same working class and need to struggle against capitalist exploitation together, that their struggles are common?
I think it goes back to the work that Ken is doing and the context that Claudia has set, really. It is about education, and it's about education at every level, and it's got to be an explanation of the world which enables us to understand the way in which capitalism has exploited class, but also exploited people on grounds of race, and how that is a joint struggle, and that the only way we overcome it is through solidarity. And it is, I think it is through concrete examples. Just take Ken's point. Let's go, that Claudia's just mentioned about colonialism, and Kenya is a good example. My wife's going, their family are from Kenya, and I'm going back to Kenya. My mother-in-law took me down streets where Asian people were not allowed to walk on some sides of the street because there was a Mzungu, a white club in that street. So Asians weren't allowed anywhere near it. And in for example, working in the railways or in the civil service in Kenya under colonial rule, Asian people, Black people, were only allowed to rise to a certain level and couldn't go beyond that. And that's literally within people's lifetimes. And I think the common everyday, in addition to all the brutalities Ken and Claudia have exemplified, that common and everyday oppressive racism that came from colonialism. But what I'm interested in, this is where Marion really, in terms of the MML, the Marx Memorial Library, maybe we could do something later, is how that colonialism developed into neocolonialism and continues on to this day as a result, and what the consequences of that are. Because as we understand, the question you asked is how do we bring people together? We bring them together through education, because as they share that understanding of the world as it now operates and the history of how we've got here, I think that enables people to make connections with their relative oppressions. And I think that's the way forward. So I'm really interested, and maybe because of the economic background, I'm really interested in how we teach how colonialism and its brutality moved into neocolonialism, which actually in many ways is equally brutal in terms of its consequences for people's living standards, life expectancy, and yes, actually quality of life overall. So I just go back to the point that Claudia and others have made. This moment now, as a result of Black Lives Matter, is our moment. It really is. It's our moment to demonstrate how we've got to this situation, what the relative aspects of class and race oppression have been as a result of the historical operation of capitalism, and then how you can break through that through solidarity and through joint action. So I just think it's a bit like that Naomi Klein book, where it's almost never again sort of thing. She discovers the issues and researches the issues around the environment, and basically says, I'll never be the same again, I have to change. Well, now as a result of Black Lives Matter, I think that's the same with us. We cannot ever have a political discussion now without taking into account the narrative from Black Lives Matter and what that means. And as a result of that, I think from that comes solidarity. So I'm extremely optimistic as a result of the movement that's now developed and the heroism that's been showed and the courage that's been showed as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think, John, you won't be surprised because you're from this neighborhood, that actually it's in people's lifetime that even up to 1980s, there were bars and places from where Black people were banned and wouldn't be served. I lived opposite a pub in Southall. Southall is in West London, of those that don't know. It's predominantly an Asian town or ethnic minority town. And I lived opposite a pub where I could not be served in a bar until the burning of a pub in 1981 when the riots took place in inner cities. And that's changed again. It was an event that changed people's mindsets. And now suddenly the doors were open for us. And we had a labor and social club in the middle of Southall Broadway that was doing the same thing. So we've had these people, where Indians and dogs not allowed, or Irish not allowed, Black people not allowed. We continue to find that. And it is events like the George Floyd event that suddenly has brought this now to the fore. And we've got to seize that moment. So thank you. I think there are a couple other questions, which I'll put it to you, and we'll see who wants to come in on this. So one is a very general one. So how best can we fight race hatred and the rise of the far right? And I guess that's equally important for Britain, where we're operating, and for Londoners, where the Marx Memorial Library is, as it is from anybody else who's on Facebook or anywhere around the world, is the rise of the right. And whether it's Trump or Bolsonaro or Modi regime in India, where that's also happening. And of course, we got dear old Boris here. So what do we do about that then? So who's going to come in first on that? Claudia, you want to kick off? John, you want to kick off? Go on, John.
I thought just 2 sentences, really. You use every form of resistance available to us. It's as simple as that. I think we're in a dangerous moment now. If Trump gets re-elected, I think it's extremely dangerous, not just for America. I think it also gives encouragement to people like Johnson about how far they can go, and also other leaders around the world. So I think we're in a very dangerous moment. So therefore, we've got to use every form of resistance we possibly can. And that does mean, yes, exactly as we're saying tonight, the whole process of education, but it also means the traditional forms of mobilization, which is out on the streets, which is industrial action, the strike action that we're seeing by sports people in America today. It means using every form of means of communication that we can get our message across, that we will not tolerate racism, we'll stand together. And I think this coming period is going to be an incredibly important and critical period in political history and world history, particularly, as I say, the threat of Trump being re-elected, I think is extremely dangerous. You're on the edge of a form of right-wing authoritarianism we've not seen since the 1930s, and it's translated into racism as well as attacks on working class people.
Yeah. Claudia?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. There's nothing much more to say than that, really. That the whole movement of the far right is actually a global movement, which is why we have to remain internationalist in our outlook, which is why what happens to African American men, women and children in the US is important, and it's why we have to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and all those protesting against this level of state-sanctioned racism, because we are talking about systems of our states across the world. Really, we see it in Brazil, we see it in America, we see it here in the UK, that have been taken hold of and controlled by a system of authoritarianism writ large. And this authoritarianism is actually fueled and funded by global wealth as well. So we have to understand what's keeping these authoritarians, right-wing people in control. It is also a finance and funding agenda, and that's why we have to resist at all levels, but we also have to stand in solidarity with the struggles that are happening across the world. And that's why what's happening in the Amazon and what's happening to the indigenous communities of Brazil is equally as important, and we need to stand in solidarity with what's happening there too. So ours is about resisting, absolutely, and John is absolutely right about that. And we therefore have to, continue. It's what's happening in terms of America with the sports stars going on strike and withdrawing their labor is something that we have to hold tune with, because it's really important that people do withdraw their labor in pursuit of racial justice, and in pursuit and in tackling injustice. Because if we can do that at a global level, then we can, in a sense, hold those that want to oppress us, hold them to account and say no. We can stand up and say no, just not just here in the UK, but globally, internationally. Ours is an international struggle, and we should never forget that. We should always stand up for the oppressed, wherever that is happening across the world. And this has to be the time where change happens.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to now invite Marion, who's been technically assisting us, before I thank you all and let you go. Marion, if you're able to unmute yourself and say a few words about MML and about the exciting programs that Alan's referred to and John's alluded to, and so is Claudia and everyone else. So over to Marion. And thank you for assisting.
No problem. Thanks, Asif. And thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been a really fascinating evening. I just wanted to come in really on what John mentioned about the history of imperialism and making the connections with neo-imperialism today, because that's very relevant to what some of the conversations we've been having in the last few weeks. We've been speaking to the International People's Assembly and Tricontinental about their projects around struggle against imperialism, and we've actually used some of our poster collection. We've got, I'm sure many of you know, we've got about 2,000 posters in our archives that are just phenomenal visual and very striking sources that really bring this history to life. So we've been using those digitally to start these discussions, and we plan, it's due to be discussed at our education committee next week, an event on anti-imperialism and education. And I'm hoping also to have a discussion with Hasif about the Indian Workers Association's campaign around the Amritsar massacre as well, along those lines. But I think it is something that the Marx Memorial Library is perhaps uniquely positioned to do, because we have, you know, literally this tangible history in our building about working class struggle, about solidarity, and about struggle against imperialism and racism. And so all of this is, as we've heard this evening, is obviously interwoven, and just making this stuff available, you know, opens people's eyes and it enables people to really get to grips with the structures that underpin so much of what we're dealing with in society today. And it can, as Alan was saying, it can be a relatively simple process of literally getting this stuff out and showing young people it, because as we've seen, that can have quite a powerful impact. So that's really all I wanted to say, just because, and thank you everybody so much. I think it's been a really, hopefully the first of many conversations on this really important subject.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you. Right, final thoughts from our panelists, and before we let them go. So Alan, over with you first. 30 seconds, or a little bit more perhaps.
No, just thanks for inviting me along. It's been really great to sort of talk about the work we've been doing. It's really important, and as I said before, you know, I've been interested in developing these ideas over many years, but now's the time when you can have a wider platform and get more people informed, interested, and involved. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Claudia?
Well, I really don't have much more to say, except to say that this is our time, and we really do need to take this opportunity. We need to stand in solidarity with each other. You know, when I was growing up, I had the fortunate opportunity to be able to be taught the works of people like Stokely Carmichael, for example, and who said that you know, my generation, and that would be my elders' generation, my generation used to run. Well, your generation ain't running anymore. So that was then. This is now. We stopped running. Now we want to see change, real transformational change. This is a generation now that is saying no more. It is not going to even put up with even what my generation put up with. It wants change. It wants real transformational change. And it's up to each and every one of us to stand in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, and support our young people to deliver that transformational change. We can do this because our unity and our solidarity and our internationalism, we can achieve this. So let's do it. Solidarity. Thank you.
And John, our Vice President of MML, your final thoughts.
I think the last words should be left to a black woman. I don't think I can add to that, apart from, please, if you're not a member, join the Marx Memorial Library. This is an asset for all of us in this struggle. Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, Ken. Thanks.
Thank you. No, thank you. And on that very, very important note, we did start off by saying we need 10 more members. So if anybody out there, if you are a member, absolutely brilliant. If you're not, do join. Or if you know anybody else in your family and your friends at your workplace, get them to join. Let's get that 100 for August and do another 100 next month again. And I do have a very personal statement to make, that I'm linked both to Leicester and to West London. So I also went to the same schools that Claudia referred to. And spent most of my life in West London here. So I remember Terry Dix and fighting the racist bigots of that time that John finally got rid of from here in our area from Hayes and Harlington. So great victory, and he's won ever since, and keep those racists out. We still got a big fight on our hands. And Claudia, you really have been extremely inspirational. I think even Alan had to agree that it was very difficult act to follow. But you know, you're always very, very difficult, very inspirational, and always standing up to racism. We're very proud of you, very proud of the work you do, very proud of the work Marx Memorial Library does. And for Marianne to pull this together, and we certainly, all of us from here, wish Roger the very best in securing the General Secretaryship of Unison, and look forward to greater victories beyond this day. So thank you, all of you, from my heart, deep down. Great. Solidarity forever. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.